Hello, everyone. Welcome to the People Strategy Forum. So, if you've ever wondered what the world might look like if we led it from respect first and then profit second, uh, today you're going to be learning some new techniques to put in your arrow of quiver, your quiver of arrows there. Joining us today on the People Strategy Forum is Mark Babbitt, a culture architect, executive coach, and a co-author of Good Comes First, and also a world gone social. With a career rooted in helping leaders turn toxic workplaces into thriving ecosystems of purpose, Mark believes there's no such thing as a labor shortage, only respect shortage. And he's not afraid to call it out on companies when he needs to. So Mark has been named as one of Inc.'s top 100 leadership speakers and a top 50 leadership innovators. So if you're one of our regular leaders that are listening into this conversation, Mark is a person with in-depth knowledge on culture that can set your organization up correctly and so that you can move forward with confidence. So please welcome a champion of respect-driven leadership and one and only Mark Babbitt. So welcome, Mark.
Well, thank you. Geez, now I have to live up to that introduction. Thank you, sir.
Yes, for sure. So one thing that, Mark, before we get started, I mean, what I love to do as an introduction to guests on our show is to really just start a bit with your history. I mean, how did you get to where you are today? What was your journey, and that they're really wanted to focus on changing organizations for the better?
So, well, it's a long. Let me try and make a very long story short for you. I knew from the time I was 12 I wanted to serve my country. So 3 days after I graduated high school, I was in the Air Force and wanted to make that my career. And they began to privatize a lot of that, even way back in the 80s. And we lost our discipline, we lost our focus, and I said, no, I can't do that. So I did what every military trained engineer does in the 80s. I went to Silicon Valley and became entrenched in first engineering and then in the startup world. And so did that until about 2010. We launched a job board as a startup for young careerists, for college students, and we found out quickly that while we were doing a good job of helping people get hired for their first internship or their first job, we were moving them into what felt like, they thought it was going to be their dream job, and the work culture was more like a nightmare. And so I immediately changed my focus, my personal focus, as we were launching. The company was called U-Turn, to helping companies realize just how toxic their cultures might be, and more specifically, leadership's role in how their culture is perceived. As you and I talked about offline a couple times already, if we come up with a toxic culture, it's almost always a leadership issue. And so my work now is 100% focused on helping companies realize what their culture is really like now, not what the About Us page says on the website, not what the first two paragraphs of the job description says, fast-paced, dynamic, blah, 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 but what it's really like to work there, and how do we make it so workplace respect is just as important as the results we're trying to achieve.
Yes. Yeah, so true. And I know that a lot of companies are, I mean, they often wonder why there's a disconnect between the people that they're bringing in and sometimes you can see it just on their website. I mean, the leadership is marching to a different mantra than what it shows on the website, right? So is that one thing that you look at when you start you start with a new client?
Absolutely. The first step of our process working with any client is what we call discovery, simple enough. And when we come back to leaders with what we've learned, we interview frontline workers, middle managers, sometimes the entire team in small companies. And when we give them that report of what it's really like to work here, we just did this last week, and the leaders just went, man, I had no idea. I had no idea. And And that's fine. It's a great place to start, actually. It's a lot better than some leaders who go, oh, great. So we opened this up and all people did was complain. Well, you know what? I don't like complainers. I'll just get rid of everybody and start over. Oh, well, that's productive. That's helpful.
Yeah.
That's respectful, right? So, the self-aware leader, the change-ready leader, obviously is much more fun for us to work with than that usually old white guy who just says, "Well, if they're not happy, leave." Right?
Yeah.
And so you can't change a culture in that environment.
So you want to work with leaders that are flexible, that are willing to change, willing to be people-centered.
Yeah, all of those things, and I think primary to that is we need to work with leaders who have some emotional intelligence, and as you know, Sam, a big part of emotional intelligence is self-awareness,
Right?
and when you finally get that, it's not a death sentence or anything, but when you finally get that report that says, "Wow, I had no idea my culture, I had no idea my own people felt this way,"
Yeah.
and when you can apply some emotional intelligence, some self-awareness to that, great. Now we know exactly where we stand. Where do we go from here? And that's where we excel.
So I also want to dig in. I know that you were a co-author in the book "Good Comes First," and so what was the driving force behind writing this?
Well, I am still. The book's been out for quite some time now, and a few years, and I'm still just thrilled with the impact it's had. And I was thrilled for the opportunity to work with an amazing guy who's been in the culture world for 30 years, Chris Edmonds. And Chris and I had both written books before him called The Culture Engine, which I highly recommend, and me called A World Gone Social, that studied the impact of social media on leadership and on business in general. And we both said that's enough. We don't ever want to write another book. And then, 2011, I believe it was, I was the closing keynote at a company culture conference in Chicago, and Chris was in the front row, and he said, "We need to go get a bite." I said, "Okay, we're really tired, but been a long day, but let's do that." So we went to a steakhouse and we closed the place down. We were there for 5 hours. They finally had to go, "Look, we got to clean up." And so Chris and I started talking about not just the need for driving workplace respect, making respect as equally as important as results, but on the accountability, holding leaders and people accountable for living that culture. And the more we talked, the more we learned that it was this lack of accountability. Sam, you probably worked with a guy. I always pick on salespeople. In one of the startups that I worked for, I was not a founder. I was brought in to help fix it. They had this alpha male sales force, and it was highly competitive. It was restrictive. It was racist. It was sexist. It was, but the people that were doing well were doing very well. I mean, they had this whole team that was easily 135 to 150% of quota every quarter. And so all of the new sales managers came from that team because of this alpha male culture that they had. Well, in the meantime, their turnover rate 76%.
Wow.
In 6 months. 3 out of 4 people were being replaced every 6 months because the racist jokes were being told, the sexist jokes were happening, women employees were being hit on by the alpha males. It was as toxic as you could be. And it was most definitely a leadership issue. For example, they put 110 salespeople on the 4th floor of a building in San Jose, California that had 0 windows.
Oh, jeez.
It was literally, it was
like a bunker.
It was a bunker. And they took pride in that. The alpha males took pride in it. Well, if we can work here, we can work anywhere, right? Well, yeah, that's why you're constantly, if I have to hire 30 new salespeople every quarter just to keep up, just to keep the place staffed, and your team's only 110 people, we got problems. Right? So yeah, it was when we get to that level, it's very clearly a leadership issue, because who would put human beings in a cave like that, right? And what's really important, and by the way, then they complain about employee engagement, respect, respect of the leadership team specifically, like they don't respect us. Well, I wonder why.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And so, what's the first steps of really instilling change upon a leadership group that has that mindset?
So we go right to values, Sam. We have to. We can't. Here's the problem with saying respect must be as equally important as results. Everybody on the planet, every CEO, every CTO, every CIO, they know how to measure results. They know how to measure performance, right? Almost nobody knows how to measure respect, right? And sometimes we confuse buzzwords with what respect might be, right? Employee engagement, employee satisfaction. Well,
Yeah.
guess what? Gallup started tracking employee engagement figures in the late 1980s, and back then it was about 31.5% of people felt self-reported as engaged. And in various degrees. Only about 15% of them were highly engaged. Everybody else was, no, I believe in the mission, I like my work, but I'm not disengaged, right? So, but I'm not all in either, right?
Yeah.
Well, 31.5% in the late 1980s, and after spending billions of dollars in 3 decades on trying to manipulate, not improve, manipulate employee engagement, employee satisfaction, guess what the data is right now? 31.5%. Right? So, and it's because, Sam, we talk about, well, why don't you respect leadership? Why aren't you engaged? Well, if your culture sucks, if people are literally closing the door and just like doing that slow walk dredge to the front door, they get off the train and they look up and there's the building. It's like, oh God, here we go again. Well, we can't expect those people to demonstrate respect. We can't expect them to be engaged. We certainly can't expect them to be solution oriented. People like that focus on the problem, not solutions, right? So we have to work on creating an environment where everybody buys into exactly how it's going to be to work here. And we have to do that. We have to start on values. And we tell our clients all the time, you don't need 30 values. You need 3 to 5 that really mean a lot to you, the leadership team, the company, right? Things like respect, integrity, communication, safety in blue collar work, right? Almost everybody knows exactly what's important to them. It just isn't written down anywhere. Or if it is, it's put on a poster on the conference room wall and nobody ever reads it because it's just there all the time, right?
Yeah.
So that's where we start, is what are the 3 to 5 values that define your company culture? The respect side, you're already measuring the results side. What 3 to 5 values? And are those values tangible, observable, and measurable? And so we help our clients figure out not just those 3 to 5 values, but then 3 to 5 behaviors for each value that would help them understand whether somebody is living, especially a leader, is living, modeling, being chief role model, leading by example for that value. When we first got into this, I made the joke one time. I looked at the CEO and he said, well, integrity, that's our number 1 value. Great. How do you define that? Well, I define it as blah, blah, blah. I said, can we run an experiment? Can you send an email out right now to you have 20 leaders at various levels that you consider executives. Send an email out to those 20 executives and ask them for their definition of integrity. And they did. We met the next morning, 19 different definitions.
Sure. Yeah.
And most of them were attitudinal. Most of them were aspirational. They were not tangible. They were not observable. They were not measurable. So we helped him say, okay, well, what if you added some behaviors, a definition of the behaviors to that, and said integrity by definition to us is I do what I say I will do. I mean, 6 words, simple, right? Well, now everybody's got common language. Everybody's got framework. And accountability was a huge issue in this company. So it kind of fixes that issue too. right? Because if we're not high integrity personally, and there's no accountability within the company, we're clearly not living up to that value. And yet the CEO said it was his number one thing,
Yeah.
right? So that's the process. Is we have to help leaders and sometimes entire teams define which values drive them toward excellence. And once you do that, the world gets a lot more simple.
So let's dig into this a little bit, because I'm intrigued about measuring some of these soft things like integrity. How are you? Do you have a special system or a process of how you're measuring?
Yeah, we call them values and behavior surveys.
Mhm.
They are custom for every company. For instance, let's take the integrity value and the behavior. I do what I say I will do. Well, when we do the surveys, we attach a first and a last name to that. And we say, Mark Babbitt does what he says he will do. And another question might be, Mark Babbitt does what he says he will do on time.
Hmm.
Right? So, and now we send that survey out to 300 employees. And it's like 360-degree feedback on steroids.
Yeah.
And the first reaction we get, Sam, is, you wait a minute, you want me to like quantify how I feel about the CEO? Really? Is this safe? So it has to be confidential, has to be, all results have to be reported in terms of trends, not comments, right? And the surveys themselves, Sam, are really easy. We saw 6 is strongly agree, a 1 is strongly disagree. And we tell leaders, if you get a 5.00 and above, although there still may be improvement to achieve, then you're doing pretty well. And a 4.99 and below is some degree of no, you're not currently living that value.
Mm-hmm.
And once those self-aware, emotionally intelligent leaders see that, 90% of them go, okay, well, clearly I need to better demonstrate this value. How? Right? And if you don't mind, I'll give you a quick story of I can't mention the name, but major healthcare organization, insurance company in the Seattle area. They had a CIO who got a 2.5 on his being approachable. That was one of their behaviors under communication. And he said, I don't get it. I get along with everybody. Why? I said, his name was also Mark. I said, Mark is a very tall, very muscular, balding, very strong personality, nicest guy on the planet, by the way. But he was new to the company, new to the role, and he was physically intimidating, and in a good way. I mean, he didn't intentionally, upset people, but people just didn't think that this big, strong guy would be empathetic, would be compassionate. So they just didn't go to him with things. So we said, last night when you and I walked around the building at the end of the day, 7:30, I noticed about 1/3 of the cubicles were still full. Why are they still working at 7:30 at night?
Yeah.
And he said, I don't know. So, okay. So we're going to fix a couple things. You also scored low on the communication side of igniting conversations. That was one of their behaviors. Does a leader actually ignite conversations, or does he just react to the conversations brought to him or her? And I said, tomorrow night, you and I are going to walk through the entire floor, 600 employees, and we're going to go to every cubicle where there's still people working. And you're going to ask them, what are you working on? Why are you here so late? I mean, you have a family, right? And most importantly, how can I help? What do you need so you don't have to work these long hours? So he did that. We went to about 15 different cubicles. He had these highly organic conversations. We ended up calling this random acts of leadership. He literally changed the culture overnight, because I walked in that shop the next morning and everybody was abuzz that Mark had made the effort to walk from cubicle to cubicle, just asking, how are you doing? What are you working on? How can I help? And it can literally change the culture overnight, right?
Wow.
So, but we had to have that data first, because Mark considered himself approachable, right? Mark didn't understand he was intimidating. I mean, father of 4 kids, active in his church, a good man, but new to the company and nobody knew him yet. They hadn't had the opportunity to understand how empathetic, how compassionate he could be, and just those. And by the way, he kept doing that 2 or 3 nights a week until he finally left the company, and it again changed the culture immediately.
So you do, in your approach, you do a high level of coaching, individual coaching, to help these leaders kind of evolve and handle things.
Yes, and I will tell you, for me personally, that's a struggle. Sam, I tend to be very direct. I coached baseball for 35 years, and I can't wait. My son is a senior in high school this year. He's my 5th child, and my first 4, I would miss their activities. I would miss their games because I was coaching baseball. Mm-hmm. And fortunately, my 2 older sons, they were on the team, so I didn't miss that much of theirs. But excuse me, my daughters didn't play baseball, so they'd have something important to them, and I couldn't be there because I had to be on the baseball field. So I promised my youngest, who came to me later in life, that when he got to high school, I would not be a baseball coach anymore, that I would just be a dad. And so I can't wait. He's a senior now. He's going off to play college baseball. I might just jump right back into it. But the point of all that is you learn in those moments what's important to you. And that's what this process does, is it helps leaders learn what's important to them. And because I have you asked about history, I was also a single dad, full custody of 4 kids for 7 years. And I learned that directness was my ally, that rather than avoid confrontation, rather than beat around the bush about things, the more direct I was, the more I could accomplish, the better relationship I had with my own kids and the kids I coached and my workmates. And so the coaching part, my partner, Chris Edmonds, is really good at that. He's like, takes almost a psychological approach to it, where I just look at you and go, wow, is that working? Right. So sometimes we do the good cop, bad cop thing, but we always meet in the middle somewhere. But yeah, the executive coaching is some people appreciate the directness and some don't. So speaking of self-awareness, I've been working on that my whole life, and I still need to. So,
well, you mentioned that when sometimes you do these assessments, or you had the story about the CEO sending out the email about integrity and getting back 15 responses. Now, when you determine what the company's values are, and everybody agrees on that, there's still people that okay, this may be the company's value, but this is not my personal value. And so, and that, of course, having people with different values in an organization, kind of disrupts success. So how do you fix that over time?
So you couldn't have said a better phrase even if we talked about this and this was rehearsed. You said over time. Here's the reality, and I'll use that health insurer as an example. They were known, if you came in and said, "Hey, my wife's looking for work. Here's what she does," they would just hire her, right? Or the other way around. If a female employee came in and said, "Hey, my son needs a job," or "My husband's out of work," so nepotism was the hiring practice, right? Mm-hmm. And some of those people have been there 20 years, and some of those people were absolutely toxic, and in some cases, the relationship between spouses was toxic. They bring their personal life into work, right? And so we had to make it okay to say, look, you've been here 20 years, appreciate everything you've contributed, but we have a newly defined culture now, and you're not personally aligning to that culture. And we didn't force feed this on you. We broke up into what we call accountability teams, and we socialized the values and the defined behaviors before we made them real to collect input. At that time, you said you agreed with all of those, and we had a great discussion about that, but you're still being disrespectful to your wife at work. That is carrying over. You're being disrespectful to the people on your team. That's counter to about 16 of our 30 valued behaviors. And it can't be that, despite the fact you've been here 20 years, and despite the fact that's been okay for 20 years, it's not okay now.
Mhm.
And so, and that's where accountability comes in. And so Chris and I sat down and said, okay, we're not going to write a book without specifically addressing the accountability issue. How do we do that? And so we took our own executive coaching and we said, it really comes down to 5 phases. First, in our line of work, Chris and I have to model our personal values and our company's values, right? And Chris and I work for 2 different companies. Now, the good news is the values of those 2 companies lined up almost perfectly. So when Chris and I work together, it's like meant to be, right? So, and our values are, as you can imagine, aligned with our personal values, right? So easy there too. But when you get somebody who says they believe that specific value or that specific behavior that would demonstrate that you're living that value is important, but then they don't do it, well, we have to have accountability. And so we learned our executive coach, it comes down to modeling the behaviors themselves. Again, especially if you're a leader, being chief role model. Chris says it best. He said, you can never run a yellow light again. Because once you've agreed to these values, you can't do that. Oh, do as I say, not as I do thing. You have to model them, right? And you're going to have to, especially as a leader, you're going to have to help coach people toward those. You can't just go, here's our values starting now. You must live these values. No, it's over time. We're looking for incremental improvement toward those values, especially those 20-year employees. First of all, you can't change culture just by saying we're changing culture. Yeah. And second, it can't be punitive. You have to give people time. So you have to coach them toward alignment. We have to measure, and we help companies do that, or we show them how to do that. Some companies don't have the budgets required for us to systemically interview and survey all their employees. They do it internally, fine. But you have to have quantitative data. And right. So you have to measure, right? Just as important, these next 2, when somebody's completely, absolutely aligned with the values, and it shows, the data shows, their performance shows, their peers love working with them, you have to celebrate that. You have to reward alignment to those values, right? So celebration is one of the practices. And last, Sam, is we kind of co-opted the mentor word, because in our practice, we found that it was pretty easy to move from coach to mentor when somebody was wholly unaligned to the values. Then that conversation turns from, I'm going to inspire you to align, to, this isn't working, and I care about you, I care about your work, I care about your place here. So as a mentor, we're going to have a tough conversation now. Yeah. And we are going to be looking for incremental improvement. And I need to see improvement in X number of days, or no matter how long you've been here, and no matter what your role is, and no matter how much you've contributed, you can't work here anymore. I have no choice but to share you with the competition. Because we can't say that respect is as equally important as results if you don't live that. Right. It's not okay here. And so that's what the accountability model does, is it gives leaders a common language, a voice to say, this is not personal. This is not an attack. This applies to everybody, including me. And here's the tough conversation we need to have right now. And that has been the biggest victory for company culture, in my view, and forever, is, wow, we're actually willing to have those tough conversations, including to say, I have no choice. I have to lovingly set you free. You can't be here anymore.
I love that approach of what you just mentioned there, because as I'm a total rewards professional focusing on compensation, and, you have to set those goals, those goals to accomplish. You hold people accountable to those goals. You measure performance, and then you celebrate success. And if it's not there, you realign. And so it's a beautiful approach. So I love it, Mark. So I would love to take the next thing, though, is when you're thinking about values, and then it's, what about talent acquisition? How do you use values in that intersection?
So this is a new thing. Chris and I we were in Boise, Idaho, of all places, and this is several years ago now. And we asked, one of your key problems was retention of current employees, and you weren't getting any employee referrals because the culture was borderline toxic. Well, nobody wanted to invite people to come work with them, even if a job was open. How's that going? And what did you do to change that? Because they said that they had self-reported that they had gone from 45 employee referrals in the first 6 months of the year to 155 the second 6 months.
Wow.
So of course we asked, geez, that's 250, 300%. What changed? They said every job interview, we walk in with this document that lists our values and our behaviors and our results expectations. And we set that in front of the interviewee. It's our first question. And we say, do these values align to your personal values? Is there anything here that surprises you or needs clarification? Anything that we need to share our definition of that value? It's the first 20 minutes of every job interview. And from the time they did that, they started and deliberately started hiring, not just can you do the job, but can you do the job as a great citizen? Can you take care of your internal and external customers based on these values? And some people would look at that piece of paper and go, yeah, I'm just here for a paycheck. I don't know if I want to get into all that. I'm just looking for a job. Well, boom, you're not hired, right? But the most people look at that. And by the way, we have 5 or 6 clients doing this now. Everything from a 60,000 employee company to a 15-person company. And they look at that and they go, wow, nobody's ever shown me this in a job interview before, right? Yeah, this is the kind of culture I want to work in. And so those people, you go from being, yeah, it's great to have a job interview to, wow, this is really the kind of company I would thrive in. And so, yeah, it's that company and others, we actually started asking our clients, has this been your experience? And we went to 18 different clients, and they did report that employee retention was up over 100% and employee referrals were 200 to 250%. So just by in the talent acquisition process, throwing the values right up front.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm telling you, it's just like the light bulb goes off. It's been so fun to see.
Now you mentioned also the importance of communication from leadership and so forth. So what cadence or how should companies communicate their values in meaningful ways to keep them front and center in front of employees?
Well, let me tell you what works and what doesn't work, Sam. Mm-hmm. So we had one client who said, you know what, we're going to start talking about our values in every meeting. And specifically, we're going to ask leaders to bring an example of one of their employees that lived a certain value. And it's a great idea on paper. But over time, the only time values were discussed were for the first 10 minutes of every leadership meeting. Right? So you can imagine, and by the way, they would talk about an employee, but then the employee would hear about it later and go, hey, great job on, such and such. Great job on what? Well, the leader hadn't even told the employee they were going to talk about them. And so another leader would go up and go, hey, great job. Okay, thank you for what? Right? So that's not how you celebrate.
Yeah.
Right? So that doesn't work. Right? It can't be scripted. It can't be once a week or once every other week or whatever it is. The rewarding process has to be organic. It has to be in real time, and it has to become systemic. Otherwise, and by the way, it has to be appropriate, right? I told you about that one startup that just had all kinds of problems. Their CEO thought a Friday pizza party was the answer to everything. And this 300 all 300 employees would descend down in this, small area, and the pizza would be abundant, and at that time, so would beer, and people would be propped up on the stage and said, "This is what this person did. We're so happy for them. Congratulations, great work." Well, some of those people would just shrivel under that kind of attention.
Right. Yes.
It wasn't personality appropriate at all, right? Some people just want a pat on the back, right? Some people, if you don't like the physical touch, just make eye contact and go, "Dan, good work," right? And do it in front of other people, right?
Yes.
Because you want other people to go, "Dang, he's never said that to me," right? So I got to step up my game, right? So yeah, it's got to be intentional, organic, real time, personality appropriate, but it's also got to be, there's got to be a little public in there too, just a little sometimes. Some extroverts, they fine, throwing a pizza party, I'd love it, right? But other people just want to be acknowledged. They just want to be validated that their work matters, that their work contributes to the mission. And by the way, talk about talent acquisition. You have to hire leaders, Sam, as you can imagine, that align very much with that value, or they cannot be leaders here.
That's right.
Right? If you aren't sincerely profusive with the celebration practice in my company, you cannot be here. Because it's so key to our work, we have to live that model, right? And if you if you have one of those leaders that goes, "Oh, good, you say you're a sales manager, right?" And you go, "All right, you were at 97% of quota, but I know your daughter was sick this week, and I know your elderly parents living with you now, but yeah, you didn't make 100, right?" Well, that's a whole different conversation than, I know your mom's living with you now. I know your daughter's been sick. We got 3 weeks to go before the end of the quarter. You're at 97%. How can I help? Right? And then that's a whole different conversation than, yeah, you effed up. You're 97%. And basically say, I don't care what's going on in your personal life. This is work, right? Well, that's how things happened in the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s. That isn't today's reality, and people are not going to put up with it for very long.
Right. So I want to bring up another thing that I've been thinking about is when we talk about culture. I mean, culture in itself is, when we think about that in just a national perspective, we know that cultures are different around the world, different expectations and so forth. But then also in the United States here, where there's generational differences. Do you see generational differences play into your business?
Every single day, Sam. And I'll tell you how it manifests itself is the lack of respect between generations. People of certain generations are very quick to point out how people of other generations don't have the work ethic that their generation has. They don't have the commitment. They don't have the grit that their generation is. Well, they do. It just manifests itself differently. And younger generations crave that validation. They crave the celebration. They crave the reward, not in monetary terms necessarily, but they just need their work needs to matter to them more than us. I'm a cuss boomer, right? And I was raised by an Irish lumberjack, and it was, do the job or else, right? So I get it. I completely understand. But that's not how the world works anymore, right? And we've had to have some people, I've had to look at high-level managers and go, is that old white guy? He's killing you. Is this really the kind of leader you want to have? Because he's not being, he doesn't have an empathetic bone in his body. He doesn't care why somebody may not be performing well. He only cares that they're not performing well. Right? That person can't be a good coach. They certainly can't be a good mentor. He's killing you, right? And I hate to say it, Sam, but in our line of work, we talk about this in the book, Good Comes First. We call it boomer male syndrome. And it is almost always, when we have a toxic leadership situation, it is almost always an older white male who's doing that iron fist do it or else
Yeah.
thing. I'll tell you, we just worked with the state of Maryland 3 weeks ago. 200 law enforcement officers, parole officers, correctional service officers, all in the same room talking about building a respectful culture. And there were people whose bosses were in the room with them.
Mm.
And they had to be brave enough, courageous enough to say, I'm just so tired of the iron fist. Can't thrive in that environment. And their boss is like 3 seats down from them.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It was an eye-opening, inspiring talk conversation all around, not just integrity and respect and all, but just courage to come out and say, as a 28-year-old employee, my 65-year-old white boss is driving me nuts with this stuff. Right. And so it ended up going 2 days instead of one. It was so deep. It was so reflective, retrospective that we ended up going for quite a while just to have that conversation around generations. And the key, we talk about the problem. What's the solution? Ask the question. We're a little behind.
Yeah.
Tell me what's going on. Tell me what resources you need. Tell me how I can help. And you don't do that on the day of the deadline. You do that if it's an 8-week project. You do that with 2 weeks left, or 3 weeks left, or 4 weeks left. Right? You also set up communication ahead of time to say, don't give me lip service. We're halfway through the deadline on this project. How's it looking? What do you need? Do you need more bodies? Do you need more money? Or do we need to take something else off your plate so you can really focus on this? Because we said this is your number one priority. You know that whole cliche, Sam, when everything is number one priority, nothing is.
That's right.
Right? But you have to have that conversation and be willing to help. It almost crosses over into servant leadership. It's, I'm here to serve you. So you tell me what you need to get this done and done well. Right? Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, most older leaders don't share that leadership trait.
Great. Well, thanks, Mark. I really enjoyed this conversation. But as we wrap up here, what are the core things that you want our leadership that are listening into this call to walk away with?
Well, I'll tell you. I'll answer that question by sharing a recent survey from MIT Sloan. Highly respected. Not one of these like SHRM that talks to 120 members, exclusively members, and then puts out this big survey like it's statistically relevant.
Yeah.
MIT Sloan surveyed 18,000 employees, none of them from Massachusetts Institute of Technology, none of them from Sloan. And they asked them what was most important to them in the workplace right now. This is post-COVID. And they listed a whole bunch of things: personal safety, psychological safety, pay, benefits, compensation, a boss that was a mentor, respect. And they probably 20 different things people could choose from. And workplace respect was determined to be, by those 18,000 people, 13 times more important than pay, compensation, and training, personal development combined. So in this day, in this world, Sam, people want to feel respect. They want to feel validated. They want to know their work matters. They want to know they matter. And if leaders can cross that bridge, then everything else gets better. And the data shows it. Performance goes up 35%, productivity 35%. We already talked about employee retention, 100%, 200%. Customer service, by the way, goes up 40%, right? Wow. So all of these things go up. As soon as somebody feels respected and validated, every business metric that leaders were trained to focus on, the results side of things, all of those things go way up, but you have to start with respect first.
Very powerful. So, Mark, what's next for you this year? What other things are you focusing on?
Well, I'm thrilled to say that we are busier than we've ever been, Sam. I mean, the political environment here in the U.S., the fear-based leadership that's being modeled has opened the door for us in many ways, and it's baseball season, so I believe very much in work-life balance, and so I'm I'm gone at 3:15 every day because every day there's a baseball game because that's what's important to me. My son's graduating soon. That's important, obviously. So our focus is going to be the same as it's always been. There's no new books, anything coming out now. I will say in June. I'll tease this with your audience. We are developing a roundtable for leaders who want to know exactly how to measure what their culture looks like right now, what their level of respect is right now, and that's coming up for us in late June, and we did that deliberately because of baseball season and graduation, and so look out for that. We'd love for you to join us, and we think that will be the first step for many leaders who still believe the About Us page, still believe that first paragraph or two in the job description. No, let's find out what your culture is really like right now.
So many of our leaders that are listening in, if they're wanting to reach out to you, learn a little bit more about your process, or just follow your feed or things like this, where would you direct them to?
Well, I write to our website. It's goodcomesfirst.com. And if you'd like to email, Chris and I, by the way, we both answer our own emails. We don't have admins. We do that intentionally. We want to be at the front of the communication. We don't have gatekeepers. You can reach us at authors@goodcomesfirst.com. We'll respond that day.
Nice. Well, it's been a great conversation, Mark. Thank you so much for your time today. I think that our audience got a lot out of this conversation, and I'm looking forward to sharing it with a lot of my clients. So thank you so much, Mark.
Thank you, Sam, for everything.
All right. To all you listening in to the People Strategy Forum, we'll see you next week. All right. Take care, everyone. And like Mark says, get out there and enjoy that baseball. All right.